Hello, everybody. It's the Historical Gamer once again, but you can call me Matt. And today we are returning to the Single Malt Strategy Podcast. This is episode number 79. I'm joined today by my trusty co-host, Eric. You can call him Tortuga Power. How are you doing today, Eric?
Am I really that trusty? I don't know. Sometimes I wonder.
I mean, I trust you.
Yeah, I really pulled the wool over your eyes. I'm doing well. I guess I'm a little bit beat up from work, but I'm excited about the podcast, as always.
Yeah, and I am too. And today we have a special guest, a first-time guest on the Single Malt Strategy Podcast, Ben Magnus of Twitch and YouTube fame, and also over there at Paradox. How are you doing today, Ben?
Well, I'm doing great. It's like 7 a.m. here, so I got my coffee. I got my dog sleeping on my feet. It's good. It's a good day.
Yeah, life could be worse, right? Dog sleeping at the feet, coffee, nice morning, over in yonder across the pond, I guess.
For those of you who don't know, I'm in Stockholm now, formerly Florida, so big step up.
Florida man makes good.
I escaped.
So how are you doing today, Ben? What have you been playing lately?
So other than the topic of this podcast here, recently I played The Great War.
Ooh.
Which was quite good. Western Front? Yeah, that's what it's called. I'm waiting for a patch, though. Did either of you play it?
Oh, yes. Matt, I mean, you can probably talk a lot about it, Matt. We actually we're going to do a podcast on this one, too, at some point.
Oh.
Ben's already making a play to be on the next episode, too, right?
He knew.
Yeah, exactly. I have thoughts. So maybe we don't go too deep into it right now, but I have thoughts.
Well, that's pretty cool because I saw you were streaming on it a while back when it first came out. I didn't know if you had stuck with it. I've been playing it a lot actually. Obviously, we're recording this in early May, and I've got my final episode going up on my channel for my series tomorrow. I think it is, which is the last episode in my Victory is the Central Powers, and I have seen the game change somewhat with some of the patches that have come out. I think it is a really interesting look at World War I. You don't get a lot of World War I games, right? Like there's just not a lot out there these days. And it's cool because it merges the tactical and the strategic side of things in the campaign. So I think there's a lot to talk about there. I think there's a lot of good. There are some limitations. I am kind of where you're at, Ben. I have thoughts. Don't know that I'm ready to express those thoughts because they're kind of complicated. Like I go back and forth on this. And I think it's very close to being a home run. I think my concern though is like the long-term support. It's made by Petroglyph and they don't have and this, I don't mean this is a negative thing. I think they make games that are generally pretty good on release, but I don't think they have like a long life cycle of development with their games. It's usually sort of release, get it in a steady, reliable state. And then they don't really I don't think they typically add much in the way like DLC or additional content or additional support. It's kind of a release and move on to the next game approach that a lot of developers don't do that anymore. But yeah, I mean, they release pretty decent, solid games on release and then just kind of move on. So I don't know if we'll get a bunch more patches or not.
I hope we get some because I don't want to go too deep into it because especially if we're going to do you are going to do an entire episode about it. But my major gripe is that it's far too easy. I almost never fail offensive attacks, even with inferior numbers. I just found it incredibly easy to launch attacks on fortified trenches, which does not feel very World War I-y. And the meta of how to play the game is very wonky and doesn't really fit historical reality. The meta of okay, so your machine guns are not best out front of your trenches; they're best behind the lines a couple lines. It's best not to have connected trenches. It's best to have them just disjointed little bits. The fact that people in trenches, you cannot fire into trenches with guns. You can only basically jump into them and do melee.
There's some exceptions with certain units, but yes.
There's a lot of meta stuff about how the game works that's just okay, this doesn't work. Or most of the artillery does suppression damage, but doesn't do a lot of actual damage to units. But suppression doesn't slow units down. So if someone's attacking you and you blast them with artillery, they just run through it perfectly fine. And he's like, just strolling through a field, nothing going on, just artillery blowing up all around me.
Have you played since the 1.1 patch? Because they made some pretty dramatic changes to light artillery with it.
I have played it, and still, to me, that wasn't that drastic. It was like, okay, it's some light changes that now the artillery is like a little more tight and a little bit more damage, but it still felt off to me.
I just want you guys to know that I too have thoughts about this game. I'm not just a big dummy here. So just when I put that, I actually think that this game is a little bit great at modeling World War One from the perspective that it is a grind. I actually don't know if I think it's a great game. I think it's a good game for the first 10 to 15 hours, and then it's it didn't, like, in a way, which is different because it's very similar to like the Total War games, but I felt drawn to come back to the Total War. Maybe like the progression happened faster, or it was more alluring. I actually kind of thought I would put it down. So if there's a new update or something, I'd pick it back up. But I think I've settled on that as my verdict.
I think I know what you mean by the grind. I have to attack this province 5 times in a row, and each battle is going to be 30 minutes.
Exactly.
On one turn to make sure that I capture this province is very grindy. Especially when the map is exactly the same because you're hitting the same province every single time.
I wish there was a little bit more persistence between battles too. They sort of sold it as the battle evolves over the course, or the map evolves over the course of the war, and it does. But I think the only stuff that really stays battle to battle is the destroyed buildings and then your trenches.
Yeah.
And then like the shell craters disappear within seconds, the bodies disappear. What I think would be interesting is if you attack on a hex and you don't fully sweep the enemy off the hex. It would be interesting if the game kept your troops in the position that they were in or something like that. Because there was a lot. Oh man, I could talk about this game easily for an hour plus.
Yes, me too.
I don't want to go down that road. But what I would say is, I think the concept is solid. I think there's a lot of good mechanics in the game. I think there's some polishing that would make it a truly great game, and some changes and tweaks that I don't think would like completely have to change the game. I think but I think I don't know that we'll ever get there, because I think there's some core decisions around the design that would probably need to alter. I will say I felt like the game was a little too time pressed when it first came out. Like I felt like I was rushing, which seemed strange. Like I gotta get here so I can take every spot on the map, and oh no, the clock is my biggest enemy. Like that felt a little weird. But I do love what they do with supply in the game. I love the way that the strategic map supply interacts with the battles, and I have to pull myself back because this doesn't need to be the Great War Western Front episode, but I do want to talk about it, and maybe we'll do an episode on that next.
I have broadly similar opinions.
Well, what else? Have you been playing anything else lately?
I've been so busy at work that a lot of times I come home and I don't want to do something too terribly taxing. So I've been playing Graveyard Keeper again because I picked up all the DLC on sale. This for those of you who don't know, Graveyard Keeper is basically Stardew Valley with cannibalism.
Cannibalism. I'm glad you're over there and we're over here.
Yeah. And Wartail.
How are you enjoying that one compared to Stardew Valley? Because I haven't played it, but I saw it. I have played Stardew Valley and I enjoyed that one.
Yeah, it's Stardew Valley, only less crops, more graveyard and corpses.
It's interesting.
Yeah, and zombies and all that, because it's like a more adult version of Stardew Valley.
Was there still dating? Because there's dating in Stardew Valley.
No, there's no dating, I don't think. There's a lot of booze, though.
With the corpses, I didn't know how the whole dating thing would work. So, but it was a question I had to ask.
Yeah.
Well, Matt, do you want to continue on? Tell us what games you've been playing.
The Great War Western Front, obviously. The other game that I always talk about, War in the Pacific. I don't know that I've been playing much else. I'm trying to think. I think that's kind of been it. I think it's been those two games, and the game we're going to talk about a little bit. But yeah, there's a few games I want to take a look at, but I haven't gotten around to them yet. So I don't know that I have a lot to add on this segment, this episode. What about you, Tortuga? Or Eric, or whatever I'm supposed to call you.
Yeah, that's right. And we never know. I have been playing, besides the Great War Western Front, and by the way, I'm serious. I think I am going to stop playing that one. I really enjoyed it, but I'll play some more right before we do that podcast so I can refresh my opinion. But other than that, I've been playing this game, tycoon-type management game called Airport CEO. It was released a while back, so it's not like a new game. It's just a new game for me. It's kind of like Prison Architect, but you're building an airport. Well, it's pretty fun.
When I play it, it also plays out like Prison Architect because I always make some dystopian nightmare.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of amusing things. I think the UI for that game, or maybe it's really the UX for that game, is it could use just like a one more pass to make it a very good game. I'd give it kind of like a B rating overall.
Yeah,
but it's very enjoyable for a management game. It's like I'm in the same boat as you, Ben. Some days I come home and I don't really have the brain power for a rule the waves type game, so I'll just plop on Airport CEO and watch people dance around on the airport. The contractors that are immune to airplanes, that's always my favorite when I watch them like walking across a runway when planes are landing. Anyway,
that definitely feels like the type of game where it was like made by one guy was very good at doing some things, but then needed to do other things to get the game done.
Yeah, I could see that.
And it's like it's a good game, but it's again same place as you. It's a good B+ for me, but could definitely use some spit and polish.
I'm pretty harsh with my grading too, so a B for me. I mean, there's no grade inflation. I try to give a C as my average, so it's pretty harsh. But the scientist in me doesn't like to skew the curve.
You're not IGN. You're not going to give everything a 70% as long if it's garbage.
Yeah.
7 out of 10. I hated it.
Yeah, 7.5. It was amazing.
And I never even know what any of that stuff means anymore. Like, it's all so... I feel like half the time the score is just influenced by SEO. It's like, what's going to get us the clicks, you know?
Mm.
By the way, they have a DLC that's free, apparently, called Supersonic. So that makes me think of Aerobiz Supersonic Tortuga.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's not... I really... If anybody knows a good Aerobiz Supersonic-like game, let me know. And actually... I went through a bit of an airplane, airport phase with some other people. They were doing Microsoft Flight Simulator, and that's what actually kind of transitioned us into the management side of things. Because apparently there's actual tycoon type games that you can play on top of Microsoft Flight Simulator, where you can like pilot your aircraft. It counts as you're making money for your airline corporation, and then you can actually just completely move to a strategy version of the same game. You don't even fly in Microsoft's Flight Simulator, but even though it's supposed to be a mod for that.
I think there were some mods like that for Silent Hunter where it would give you like a strategic map.
Oh, that's pretty cool.
Do some stuff, but I'd have to talk to Wolf. He would know better than me. I played a lot of Airport Tycoon 2 way back in the day, which Airport CEO kind of reminds me of.
Okay, so I played Airport Tycoon 2, and I went back and looked at it, and it gets like awful ratings. Like it's a 30% on Steam or something like that. Not just because the game has technical issues, but I think it has technical issues. Even when I played it, it had technical issues. And I vaguely remember this. I mean, obviously I was much younger then. And Airline Tycoon, the original, is apparently a very good game.
Oh, you're talking... No, so I'm talking Airport Tycoon, not Airline Tycoon.
Okay. Yeah, well, that's...
Back in the day when every game was a tycoon game.
Yeah, this is one of those early 2000s, late 1990s type things, too.
See, my go-to was Theme Park Tycoon.
That's a good one.
And Railroad Tycoon.
Yeah, I mean, those are exceptional titles. I played a lot of The Sims when I wanted to build houses. It was basically the house tycoon.
You know what is a little funny is I just Googled Airline Tycoon, and it was like 70% rating. I was like, oh, war never changes. And then Steam database 22%. It's always been the same.
Oh no!
Right on cue. Okay, another one is Terra Invicta. I haven't really played that much in the last week, but since the last podcast, at least, I'm still trying to finish. And this just goes to show you that Terra Invicta is like the interminable, never-ending game that you can, I hope one day to see the ending screen. It feels, it is by the same people who did the Long War mod for XCOM. And it feels the same way where I'm like, I want to get to the end of this damn game because it's a good game, but damn it, if it doesn't take forever.
I have feelings on that one too.
Oh, well, you can express those. I think did we already do Terra Invicta?
Is that a strategy game?
Okay, we didn't do it on, that's right, you never played it. I told you 1,000 times to go get Terra Invicta, that we need to do a podcast on it. I actually did a podcast with Explorminate for that one.
My very brief take on it is that it's the core of a very good game in desperate need of an experienced UI UX designer.
Yeah, I think that besides that, I would also say that I have two strong feelings on it. First of all, I think that the game needs to evolve beyond nation management. When you get to space should just be the focus, but yet you're really tethered to all these stupid espionage and manipulation of control and public opinion. And like that should only be an early game thing, and there's no real transition out of that, so it becomes a real nuisance. And the second point is this game is like made for the Expanse. So I hope to God somebody does like a total overhaul and makes this game into like an Expanse universe where there's actually somebody, on all the different asteroids. There's Mars is its own entity. That would be awesome. I would definitely come back and play the game for that.
I have nothing to add on this.
Okay. Well, those are the games I've been playing, so I think I'm tapped out.
Well, I suppose we can move on to our titular episode or titular topic, or is that the right word? I don't know.
Yeah.
It's very titillating.
I guess today's episode we're going to be talking a little bit about Rule the Waves 3, the third one. And I realize this is a game, being the third game in the series, that despite the fact that it's been around for a while, I imagine there's a fair number of people who have probably never even heard of Rule the Waves because it was previously only available via a website called NWS, I believe Naval Warfare Simulations, which is kind of its own storefront, or is its own storefront, but has never been on Steam. And Rule the Waves 3 is going to go on Steam, so it's going to be exposed to a wider audience than has probably ever been aware of it before. And before we go too far down that road, though, Ben, do you want to talk a little bit about what is Rule the Waves? What's the game? What's the concept? What's the elevator? If you had to explain to someone who'd never heard of this before, how would you explain what Rule the Waves is?
The way I've always described it to people whenever I've been streaming it is basically you are the Secretary of the Navy from around the turn of the century to Cold War. You are in charge of designing, building, managing the budget, and then fighting with your ships. And that's it. You don't control the nation. You don't control world politics. You don't control when peace. We'll talk about this. When a war ends, you just control the ships, the boaty boats.
Cool. And you get to fight in tactical battles as well as designing ships on a strategic map and moving them around, at least at sort of a high level, to different commands.
Yeah, there's different difficulty levels, so you could play it in a matter where you have limited control during the tactical battles or very, very minute control.
Yeah, it's like captain to vice admiral. Those are like the difficulty levels that
I don't know what settings you guys play on. I always play on captain difficulty because I want to fire the torpedoes myself.
Yeah, me too.
I usually play as admiral. I want to command I want to command what I can see. And then if ships move out of my line of sight, I wouldn't have, at least in the early part of this game, I wouldn't have wireless to tell them what to do. So then at that point, it's the AI's job to figure it out. So I'll give you signal flags, and that's it.
I think that it's also a little misleading to call it difficulty, because the difficulty of the game is the same for any of those modes. It just really influences how much control you have over ships. There is a modifier when you're starting a new game to make the game a little more difficult by boosting the AI through the course of the campaign or the career. It's important for this discussion, at least it's a point that I want to make. So I'll just preface my point by saying that the game was originally, Rule Waves 1 was based on Steam and Iron. And Steam and Iron was a tactical only kind of game, where the only quote unquote strategic shell around it was just like a scenario selector that allowed you to jump into a bunch of different scenarios that they had handcrafted. I think it was built around the World War One, some series of battles around World War One, and maybe some other ones. So the game that we play as Rule the Waves is just an evolution of some tactical battle simulator for World War One type ships. I have some important things I want to say about that later, so I thought I'd preface that. But otherwise, Ben nailed the description. It's perfect to say that you don't control the nation, because that's definitely what people will think when they're picking the U.S. or whatever. No, yeah, you don't even have really that much control over who you go to war with. The tensions just kind of rise and fall, and you end up at war with people who you may not have wanted to go to war with. it's all outside of your control.
Little foreshadowing here. We'll get to this later, but I would like to, in terms of not controlling the nation entirely, fuck the Kaiser.
Okay. Yeah, so I mean, like when you're on this, when you start the game as the head of one of the nations, you're basically on this strategic map that has, or I guess Excel spreadsheet to some extent, that has a list of all your ships, different classes of ships. You have to manage the budget to determine, like, do I want to build more? Do I not? Do you want to design more ships? How do you want to handle researching items? And then, you do have some, and you've got like this section on the screen that shows the tensions that exist between the different countries. And when tensions get to a certain point, then you end up fighting a war. The strategic game is turn-based. When you fight battles, it's in real time, sort of like possible, I guess, real time. But it's interesting because you don't control the nation, you're right. But you do have some influence over it, right? Like events can pop up and things can happen and they're like, hey, what does the Secretary of the Navy think? So in some sense, it feels a little bit like the Tirpitz simulator in a way, because you can play a pretty strong role in the politics of things. As events occur, you can clearly steer away from war with certain countries, steer toward war with other countries. There is still randomness of tensions going up and down that you don't have direct control over. But I feel like as tensions get closer to war, you get more control because it's more likely that events occur with countries that you're on the brink of war with. And so you can kind of steer things to some extent in the same way that like Tirpitz's writings and speeches and whatnot had very profound political impacts and whatnot, even if he wasn't the one who caused, Germany to go to war with Britain.
Yeah, I mean, the events in the game are actually usually pulled from these historical events that you're referring to. I know that they have one where it's like submarines are, un/your country name here, like un-American or un-Italian, and underhanded. This is a reference to, I think, it was in England, I think, where they decided not to use submarines or didn't invest in research because they thought that it was like beneath the Royal Navy to use such underhanded tactics.
Well, they still used them, but there was pushback in elements of the fleet where they're like, we already have control of the seas. Why would we want to invest in something that would basically undermine our entire investment, right?
Yeah, well, whatever they just picked these events, so you get a chance to take these historical events and then apply them to the nation you're playing.
Yeah, and there's one that's very clearly like influenced by the Boxer Rebellion and other things like that. But yeah, what are your thoughts? I mean, I guess, if you have played the series, what's new with Rule the Waves 3, some of the key stuff that's new. The game starts earlier, so the previous versions of the game started in 1900. Now you can push out to 1890, so you get kind of the tail end of the Ironclad era. You get the full pre-Dreadnought era of ships, and then you go into the Dreadnoughts. The game pushes out from, I think, did Rule the Waves 2 end in 1950, was it?
Well, I don't know.
I mean, nominally, I know you can kind of push it, but
I think at 1950 is when things basically like events stopped happening. There stopped being, if you were playing on like a normal pace, that's when technology would stop progressing, but you could keep hitting the turn button.
Sure. And now this version, Rule the Waves 3, goes to 1970, and so they've made a point of, this stretches into the earlier phases of missile combat. And I want to hear from you, Ben, a little bit on that. So those are some new things. They've added officers, which I think is an interesting, although perhaps a little bit time. I don't know. I'm torn on it. I think it's cool that you have the ability to assign commanders to different divisions and to officers of ships, and you can promote them, and there can be political implications to promoting, a less senior commander. You can piss people off. And prestige is ultimately how you win. Like the goal is to amass as much sort of respect as the Secretary of the Navy.
Oh, brother!
What?
Does anybody play with that in mind? I don't care.
I mean, it's clearly the victor. Like that's when the game ends. It talks about your character based off your prestige score.
Yeah, I mean it's a score that is built into the game. So I guess if people don't have any like sandbox inclination, they don't have a sandbox bone in their body, they can shoot for a high prestige. But I think I play, and I think a lot of people might play. I mean, you can try to maximize prestige over different events or whatever, but I'm happy to take a prestige hit if it benefits me in terms of budget or something else, if I already have enough prestige to spare.
I'll take a hit, but the goal is to make it go up, right?
My goal is to paint the map in my nation's color.
Not me. My goal is usually prestige and big boats.
Yeah, I mean, like at the end of the game, if you don't have a high enough prestige, they're not going to name a battleship class after you or whatever, right? Like,
or an aircraft carrier.
Aircraft carrier, exactly.
Yeah.
I don't want some dinky little patrol boat named after me. What the heck?
I actually don't like painting the map because I find that it makes like the end game tedious.
Oh yeah, you're right. I mean, it does increase your foreign stations, that's for sure. Which is, I find that part of the game pretty tedious, managing the foreign stations, because there's like the world's broken down into like 14 different areas, and so it's a pretty large. It's very global. I mean, it's very, you don't have a lot of control of where your ships go. You put them into the Western Pacific, like these sea zones are pretty big.
Well, based on your empire, you're required to put a certain amount,
right, foreign stations
of ships in areas where you have colonies.
Yeah, exactly.
And so that's why I never play as the British, because I don't want to deal with that. Like,
I really enjoy playing as like the smaller starts.
Yeah, they're more rewarding too.
More than the larger starts, like Japan or Austria-Hungary or like even Russia. You basically just have you could pretty much ignore the Pacific side as the Russia start for a while and just focus on the Baltic.
Italy's a good one.
You mean you don't want to send your fleet over from the Atlantic all the way to the Pacific to fight Japan?
I have literally done that before, and it never works out well.
Nonsense. It sounds like a brilliant idea.
I thought that there was good historical precedent.
I wonder why. Why could that have gone poorly?
If only the Germans had been able to refuel them and take care of them the way that Wilhelm told Nicky he would.
There were a couple of other things that are new in the game. I like to mention these especially because they're very personal to me. They were both mods that I had created for Rule the Waves 1 and 2. One is they have an AI wars introduced now. So you don't just, in the previous two games, you were just kind of alone. The AI only went to war with you. They never went to war with each other. So in theory, if you were going to war with different people, like a person who was resting, not at war with you, could just get better. And then they could go to war with you right after a previous war with someone else. And yeah, I mean, basically you were always fighting an enemy that was only geared at, they would only lose their ships if you were fighting them. Now there's a system where different nations can go to war with each other, even if they're not you. And then they can lose their ships. So you might be able to attack like a weakened nation. That's a nice system. That's a mod that I had made from Rule the Waves 1 and 2. And another one is kind of a miss. I'd be curious to see what Ben thinks about this one. But they added something like an auto-resolve for people who like to play like the Total War games from the strategic perspective only, or who want to at least skip some battles. Because some wars, I mean, just like we were talking about with the Great War game, some of the battles do get a little bit grindy. You can get into wars where it's like, okay, it's my 15th raid on this port. I don't want to fight it. So the way that they instituted this game, this mode, is you just put your ships on AI control, and they're still controlled on the tactical map. It would be like going into the Rome Total War map and watching the AI control your units. And that's the quote-unquote auto-resolve that they instituted. Mine was, I always thought that it would be more of like a strategic button you would click, and it would just give you the results right away. So it was interesting to me to see that they called it an auto-resolve, or maybe they walked back on that. I don't know what the exact verbiage was. But to me, it's definitely not an auto-resolve. It's just allowing the AI to take control so you can max the game speed.
I broadly similar opinion. I would have preferred that it just be a click button and then it calculates what the outcome of the battle was and gives it to you, and then you move on. Because you're entirely right. If it's anything, I think it's a problem with the game that has been exacerbated in Rule of Waves 3 is that sometimes the wars can get extremely long and tedious. And it's like, okay, a full-sized fleet battle every 30 days is a little bit ridiculous.
Yeah.
And those battles can literally take hours to play through. So, I just want to finish this run of battleships that I really want to see done. But, oh, no, I've got to play 16 hours of fleet battles. So it would be nice to have that auto-resolve battle button, but that, I don't want to watch the AI do stupid things with my boats. Just tell me that they're dead.
That's exactly it. I can't watch okay, if you give me an auto resolve result and you show me that I think that first of all, most of the times auto resolve tend to be conservative things because I think that the game designers are smart enough to know that people do want to take control for some key battles, and then they don't want the auto resolve throwing away their fleet, without them in actual control of it. But that's not what happens when you do the AI control. At least in my very limited experience, I only used it for maybe 2 or 3 battles. And in one of them, it took my armored cruisers and actually attacked the enemy armored cruisers. And, it sank half my armored cruisers, which I was not particularly happy about. So anyway, it's interesting to see that they at least implemented it, but I'm not the biggest fan of the way it was implemented. By the way, Matt, have you played this game? Are you aware of these things? Or
yeah, I've played it. I'm aware of it. I thought it was strange when I was in a battle and I'm like, wait, I can put the ships into AI control? Okay, I don't know that I'm gonna want to just sit here, and I guess I can fast forward it more, but I don't know. It didn't seem like it was the auto resolve I was looking for.
Yeah, what's worse is I had a battle where it was basically over, but the time, there's a timer for each battle, and it has to go 800 minutes before the battle will actually quit. And I was like, okay, I'll just let the AI, I'll click on this AI resolve button mode so that the AI can just take control of my ships for the rest of the, 400 minutes or whatever. But then I had already won the battle and I moved away. And when I clicked the AI on, they went back towards the enemy. And I was like, oh, no. No. So yeah, you're really at the mercy of whatever the AI chooses to do. And it may not always do the smart thing, or at least the thing you want it to do.
What do you guys think about the division system? Do you like it? Do you use it? Is it just an extra? Because I've played this and I liked the officers in my initial playthrough. I thought the divisions adding the ability to sort of craft your fleet by building your own divisions was nice. But I saw some comments in the stream I was doing where it seemed like some folks kind of felt like, this just feels like it's just extra work and doesn't add a lot to it. And why do I care about these officers? To me, it's I want to tell a story. And I think having actual officers there helps me do that. The divisions, I wasn't entirely sure what to do with them though, because I set them up, but then if I want to do stuff that's not fleet battle stuff, do I want to withdraw those ships from the division? If I'm going to set them to raider, should they not be in a division? How do you guys interact with the divisions, and do you feel like they pose a valid purpose?
I personally rather like them. For me, I use them usually only for large ships if I have multiple classes with significantly different capabilities. So early game, they usually mean a lot to me because, okay, I've got 8 pre-dreadnoughts in 2 different classes. One goes 16 kilometers an hour or 16 knots, one goes 18 knots, and now I've got an early battleship that goes 22 and has broadly different armament and different capabilities. I can take these guys over here and put them into division. I can take these guys over here and put them into division. And when I get to the battle, I won't have ships with vastly different speeds and caliber of guns and capabilities mixed together. I like that. I generally don't get too in the weeds about making divisions outside of that with light cruisers or heavy cruisers or something like that. It's usually just the big stuff.
I'm exactly the same way. Basically, I think, Ben, you hit the nail on the head. I haven't gotten into the whole constructing your full fleet. In my mind, I like the idea of, and maybe I'll do it more when I get deeper into the carriers, having carriers and then having an escort light cruisers. Maybe you can make those with dual purpose main armaments. But I haven't gotten that far in my current game. And as far as the main purpose I see, and it works well, at least in my experience so far. Division editor does keep ships of different types different classes of the same type. It keeps them separate. And that was just something that a lot of people complained about. In fact, I also made a fleet editor for Rule the Waves 2 because it was just frustrating to see your 24-knot battleship, fast battleship, paired with a 17-knot battleship. And the divisions only move at the speed of the fastest ship. So it was just this advantage I had. I'm not even sure why they got picked to put. Why are they in the same division? I don't know. but now we don't have to worry about it.
Why is my 40-year-old coastal defense ship with two 16-inch guns on it paired with my modern battleship with 10 14-inch guns?
Yeah, you would. So at least it's really useful. I find that feature is like the best one so far. In fact, going back to the AI Wars one, I haven't actually noticed very much about this. I've seen nations go to war, but I don't know if I recorded how much damage did they do to each other.
They're very timid because in the game I've got going right now, there was one AI war going on, and like the entire course of the war, one capital ship and a couple smaller ships were destroyed during the entire course of the war. And then in the war I was going on, 14 capital ships were sunk in the first 6 months. And it's like, wow, those guys are really playing with a different set of rules, aren't they?
Did you guys feel like, because I heard you guys say that you're seeing a lot of fleet battles like over and over again?
Too many.
Is that's different than my experience with the previous rule of waves, where it felt like it was just a million tiny ship actions and maybe occasionally a big fleet action? Is that wrong? Or
no? I agree with that. In the previous, in 1 and 2, I always felt like it was a more balanced to the way I would want to play the game, in that, like, yeah, you'll fight some cruiser actions. Cruiser actions I always found super fun, or the single ship combats were always my favorite, when it was just like, this heavy cruiser out on a raid got intercepted by another heavy cruiser, and it's just one-on-one. I love that. And there was always a lot of that. But like in Rule of Waves 3, in the game I'm playing right now, I'm Austria-Hungary, and Italy has tried to invade Dalmatia every other month for 18 months. And it's just like, how many times do I have to sink all of your transports and destroy so many of your capital ships? It's just like the massive fleet battles, which take hours to resolve, just fire way too often.
Well, to be fair, in that situation, that sounds historically accurate. It's just the 23rd Battle of Isonzo at sea, you know?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I'm going back to the officers when you were talking about, Matt. I really enjoy the officers. They do add... Okay, so I, in theory, enjoy the officers because they do add a lot of flavor to the ships. And like, I think you could, if you had the patience for it, track your different officers, put them onto... I think the system is very good. The problem for me is that the game is already such a spreadsheet management game. Adding like one extra column that I have to sort by, I mean, put it in spreadsheet terms, you know. I feel like it's one more thing I have to look into, and that's probably going to make people who are like grognards, who have the time just to really dive fully deeply into the game, that's going to make them happy. Unfortunately, I mean, I don't think it's a bad thing. I haven't used it. I don't have the time to, like, you know, I want to progress time in my game. I want like 1 year to go by in my game if I'm at peace. I don't want it to take like an hour. So, because the most fun thing about the game is designing ships and then waiting for them to be built. This is like the most rewarding thing, in my opinion. Design ships and then you need to go a couple years, 3 years for them to be built. The officers things just kind of deter my ability to advance turns as quick as I'd like to.
Do they make a big difference in how ships perform in battle? Because you'll get notices of, this officer is above average, and maybe I'm just not paying close enough attention, but I haven't noticed the ship better now. I don't know,
because it's like the UI is so archaic. I would also just like to say, I fucking love these games. I know I feel like I'm shitting on it a lot, but at the end of the day, I do love these games. The UI is so archaic, though, that you don't get a lot of feedback on things. So it's like, yes, it'll tell you that this is an above average officer, and then he'll have some traits, but it won't tell you what that actually means. It's not going to tell you that he'll be less likely to misinterpret orders, or the accuracy will be X percentage better or anything like that. You don't have that feedback of what those things actually do. So it's hard to see without like a straight A to B comparison what's going on with that information.
Yeah, and it's almost like because you're not really auto-resolving very often, at least I'm not. I kind of feel like the individual captains matter less in that scenario too, because outside of maybe a ship misreading orders and going off on its own, or maybe having a better accuracy rate. Like, I don't know that I have a lot of opportunity for those officers to stand out. Maybe an above average officer would be better on a commerce rating order. Like maybe they'd be better at tracking down merchants, but I haven't noticed maybe I need to pay closer attention. I love these types of games too, by the way, Ben. So I've referred to Rule the Waves as the out of the park baseball of war games. Like, I don't know if you've ever played that, but it's like a very similar sort of super spreadsheet heavy style baseball management game where you're a GM.
Mm-hmm.
They've made it look a little prettier in recent years, but like historically it had always basically just been like you're reading spreadsheets. But what I think Out of the Park Baseball does a better job of, and maybe it's just because I know baseball stats and understand baseball better than I do naval combat. But what Out of the Park Baseball does a much better job at is feedback. And that's my biggest complaint with Rule the Waves is like, I really don't get a lot of information other than like if there's a flash fire and a ship blows up and maybe I can like interpret like, oh, I should put more barbet armor or however you pronounce that, or turret armor to prevent that from happening again, right? But like other than that, the game doesn't give you a lot of information about why a ship is performing well or why it's not. It's very obscure. You've got to dig in there and kind of make those assessments yourself, which, you know, I would think if a ship comes back from a battle, you'd probably, a captain would be like, hey, this worked and this didn't, right? And you saw that in especially in World War I. The British learned a lot from Dodger Bank. The Germans learned a lot from Dodger Bank that influenced some of the things they did at Jutland, but they didn't learn everything. And I think, you know, the British got away with a flash fire almost destroying, I think it was Lion or one of the battle cruisers had a turret that like had a flash fire, but it didn't go all the way. And so they didn't learn that. And then they learned at Jutland the hard way.
Oh, maybe we should keep the blast doors closed. That's why the engineers put them in there.
Yeah, right. Maybe we shouldn't stack shell upon shell and powder bag upon powder bag in the turrets, lining the walkways for faster reloading. But like, there's not any real feedback about why things are working or why they're not, which I think is a big miss in a game about ship design. I love Rule the Waves and I've played it a ton, but it is a lot of slogging through obscurity to try and understand why things are working and why they're not.
There's a lot of things in the game that are like mechanics and best practices and things like that exist, but are in no way broadcast to the player at all. And the only way you will ever know them is if you have like lived on the forums for that game for a while and have played all of them and understand that 2 inches of armor is the minimum required to prevent splinter penetration. The game never tells you that. That's just something that you have to figure out on yourself outside of the game. There's a lot of things that you can't learn in-game that need to be learned by reading the PDF or the forums.
Yeah, and I think that's sort of an old school wargaming style of design, right? Where it's like, well, did you read the manual? You know, like, and I don't know that that'll play well on Steam. I guess we'll see. But that's certainly sort of more of the old school style of game where it's like, hey, you should be reading the manual before you play.
Yeah, that's an interesting point because I am the person who was living on the forums and who learned all these bizarre things. That you're right. I guess I would have no way of knowing why is it that 2 inches is what stops. Why is it that you don't really need any conning tower armor? Why is that? That's my own design philosophy, at least. My captains don't need conning tower armor.
Yeah, if the ship, if it's going to get hit in the conning tower, things are going to go poorly anyway. So,
and plus, there's a 50% chance when they get a quote unquote bridge hit. There's a 50% chance it hits the bridge instead of the conning tower, and then the conning tower armor doesn't matter anyway.
Yep, and that's another thing. Like the game doesn't broadcast this information to you. I do think it would be a great mechanic is if you built a design flaw into your ships, and then 5 years later, you get into a war, and all of a sudden, a couple of my early pre-dreadnoughts flash fired and blew up. And then you'll get a notification in game. And it's like, the engineers have discovered that the lack of armor in the secondary battery has resulted in flash fires upon a direct hit. You might want to increase armor in the secondary battery or something like that.
I feel like the mechanic exists for something like that too, because if you think about it, when you build a ship, there's a chance anytime a new class of ships comes out and you commission some ships, you will sometimes, and I'm pretty sure it's random, but you'll get a pop-up that says like, it was discovered during sea trials that the ship is easily exceeding its design speed. And when you design a ship, there's a button that you press to check the design. And it'll also tell you things like, you don't have this technology, so you're getting developed yet. So what you're trying to do is going to result in a rate of fire penalty or other things like that. Like, there are a couple of things in the game that do some interesting communication to you about your design. But why don't I get a pop-up like that about a ship after a battle? Like, right, it was discovered in this battle that here are these faults, and then maybe you can address them when you refit a ship, because that is something you do periodically, is you will refit old ships to make them good again. I think the question is, that's often not worth the cost, which is silly because ships were refit all the time historically.
Yeah.
So like, maybe they could give you more reasons to refit a ship if defects or other problems come up that then would be worth the cost to fix.
That's actually segues into another point that I found out the hard way is a lot of my old strategies for building ships for longevity that would be able to be refit no longer work in Rule of Waves 3.
Oh yeah, you gotta expand on this. I may not know these yet.
In the older Rule of Waves game, there was always you got your quality of guns, and I think it was some guns go down to -2 and then up to +1, but now all guns go down to -2, and that's new. And what they did was any gun built at a -2 quality cannot be changed out. My old strategy was, okay, I've got a lot of money to spend and a lot of dockyard space, but I don't have any good technology available right now. I'll be like, okay, I'm going to build a pre-dreadnought with a big hull, and I'll just put the biggest guns in the turret, and then later on I'll be able to refit this thing to have better guns. And it could be a coastal defense ship, it could be short range and just take up just defend the homeland or something like that. That no longer works because you can't refit turrets with -2 quality guns. So my old strategy of, I'm going to take these 13-inch guns at -2 quality, put them on a big hull, and then later on I'll be able to turn that into a halfway decent battleship, or at least coastal defense ship, by giving it like triple 11-inch guns or something like that, no longer works, which removes the drive to make big ships early and to be able to refit those ships. Now it's better to just scrap them once you get better guns.
Interesting. Yeah, there were a few ships that, I think it was mostly the Germans in World War II, where they designed ships to swap the guns out with a different caliber. I want to say it was the Scharnhorsts were originally designed with the intent of putting, I think, 15-inch guns on instead of the 11s at a later time, and they just never did it. But generally, once a ship was built, like, you didn't see, no one was swapping out calibers on like the war spites, despite the fact that, they had 15-inch guns from World War I. They fought again in World War II. They didn't get upgunned in between wars with like better quality guns, despite the fact that metallurgy had obviously improved.
That bums me out though, because trying to keep ships in service as long as possible was one of the things that I really enjoyed about the game. And there's lots of runs where like the stars just aligned, where I got like torpedo protection 1 fairly early on, and I had so I could put down like, I don't know, a 22,000 ton pre-dreadnought with 4 turrets in cross-deck fire formation, and then later on it'll get upgraded to have better guns but smaller, and then later on it'll get upgraded again. Now it's got 4 18-inch guns and is just basically a 40-year-old monitor that sits behind the main battle line, lobbing giant shells into the enemy van formation. I loved shit like that, but now I can't do that at all. That has been completely removed.
Well, you just have to figure out new ways to min-max. I know that's your thing, Tortuga. You love min-maxing.
Well, can you upgrade the guns if they're at -1 quality?
In -1 quality, yes.
Okay, so it's only for -2.
Oh, it's only for -2 quality.
So your guns are just so crap that, like,
they're so garbage, they're integral to the superstructure.
Does the manual explain the rationale for that?
Not that I've been able to find.
Huh.
Which bummed me like that, because I was playing and I designed a ship purposely to be upgraded later, and then once I got the better guns, I went to rebuild it. It was just like, no, you're not allowed to do that.
Yeah, there is something about keeping ships alive for a large part of the game, which is very satisfying. And I feel like the game, first of all, I mean, we do, Ben, you should know this this podcast. I feel like sometimes we over amplify the negatives of games. We just end up talking about it. I have a critical way of viewing the world. not in a negative way, but I mean, it does end up coming off as a negative, but I look for the things which can be improved. It's just the way my mind works.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, we end up talking about things which could be improved. But I want to just say, I think that we probably all have a high opinion of this game. This is probably like a 9 out of 10 for me. I told you I don't really do grade inflation. So that's a pretty outstanding rating.
I'm curious how do you guys, so I have mixed feelings on this, but what I will say is I think the game, I feel like tech is super slow in the 1890s start.
Yes.
But like the core Rule the Wave game, 1900 to like 1920, I would almost say 10 out of 10, but it's like a 9.5 out of 10. Like the best part of Rule the Waves, in my opinion, was always big gunships shooting at big gunships.
Yep.
And the ability to design that, and the ability to have sort of a campaign over many years where you have multiple different wars. Like that was the core of the game. And like, let's be real, this was an influential game, despite the fact that it was buried away on naval warfare simulations. I don't think there's any way you can argue that Ultimate Admiral Dreadnoughts was not inspired by Rule the Waves, because Rule the Waves 1 came out first. And that was like kind of a surprising success within the confines of the store that it was in. And I know, like, was it Wilhelm or I'm trying to remember the name of the guy we interviewed, Tortuga.
Frederick.
Frederick, like made some comments too, where it was like, yeah, wow, we didn't really expect it to sell this many copies. But it's an influential game, and that part of the game is really strong. Rule the Waves 2 added air combat and through to World War II. I feel like that's kind of a weak spot in the game. Like I don't know that I'm super. I don't know, carriers and aviation in the game. There's some interesting elements to it, and like putting contracts out for new types of planes and land-based stuff mixing with the scale just feels off. And I don't know that it's super well done for aviation. But now they're adding missiles too. And like, I just wonder at one point, like when you keep adding stuff on top of it, the core of the game is still solid. I would say 1890 to 1925, 28. That game is great. But I just don't know that I'm sold on everything after that. Like aviation, and I don't even know about the missiles because I haven't really experienced them a ton yet. But like, it just feels like they're adding on to stuff that I don't know. I don't know. Like, does it need to be there? I don't know.
So I entirely agree that the core of the game, like 1890 to 1920, 1925, is the best part of the game. 10 out of 10 for me. Fucking love it. Absolutely love it. The main issue for me after that is that you spend all this time and effort and fun with your big gun battleships, and then all of a sudden the aircraft come in, and now you're no longer Secretary of the Navy. You're managing a lot of land-based aircraft for some reason, and you're paying for them. Like, why is the Secretary of the Navy's budget being used to build air bases and blimps and contract for new types of bombers and stuff like that for all of the land-based stuff? But the biggest issue with the aircraft is the UI is oppressive when dealing with aircraft.
Yeah, to me, it's the carrier. It's always the tactical battle stuff which really holds me back. I still have a lot of fun designing carriers. I really enjoy it. You go into the battles, and now instead of just you're moving your ships along and you move them towards the enemy, and then you get into range and your ships will fire. Instead of that, now it's okay. I gotta go click on the carrier fleet. Now I gotta click on this other button to bring up a new spreadsheet of all the different fighter squadrons and bomber squadrons I have. Now I have to right click and ask this bomber squadron to load this type of torpedo or this bomb. Then I have to click on someplace on the map where I think the enemy carrier is going to be. And so like the click fest gets, in my opinion, very annoying and very unfun when carriers get involved. And it's kind of fun for a little bit. The first time you have this, the whole like chasing the enemy, trying to find out where they are. That's still fun. But it's just the user interface is it holds the game back so much.
It was a fairly simple, straightforward, tight design, I think, with Rule of Waves 2. And they just keep bolting more and more on without addressing sort of the core UI UX pieces. And I think that gets in its way.
I want to ask Ben about the missile stuff because you've done it. I haven't done that yet. How's the missiles working out in 3?
Fairly simple. It's not really It's kind of like anti-aircraft guns that just kind of do their thing.
Aren't there anti-ship missiles now?
They're anti-ship missiles, but it's kind of in between. You kind of just set up and go here and attack, and they go. It's not nearly as bad as trying to set up an airstrike.
Okay, well that's good.
Can I ask, do they have sensors that like help you understand where the missiles should be targeting? Like, are these missile attacks coming in at way too close a range? Like, what does it feel right, or should I stick to command modern operations for missile combat games?
So when I got to do the missile stuff, it was a situation where it was like there was a tech void where I didn't have a lot of missile stuff, but the enemy did. So for me, it was just like, I'm trucking along, looking for some guys in the middle of the night, and then just a wave of missiles comes flying in over the horizon, and you just see them pop up on the radar, and you're just like, oh.
That's pretty cool.
I guess I get to die now.
That sounds like a really cool experience.
It was. So it's like, that's one of the things I really love about the game is like when you are in a tech void or your enemy is in a tech void and like the stars have aligned, you have a technology that just makes your fleet so far superior to theirs that you're trouncing them. Or it's the other way around and you're the one getting your ass handed to you because it's like, okay, obviously it's the middle of the night and they are landing hit after hit after hit after hit. Clearly their radar tech is much more advanced than mine, and I need to work on that before I get into another shit. I love that part of the game. Even if I'm blowing up left and right, I still find it entertaining.
Okay, well, I did have one thing I wanted to say about the game. But basically, it's going back to the point about how this was originally Steam and Iron, a tactical game, and we talked to Frederick about this too, Matt. I don't know if you remember it, but he designed Rule the Waves as some kind of way to get people to play the tactical engine. So originally, Steam and Iron was just this World War I scenario-based thing, but they had this idea, what if we have this nice tactical engine, how do we get people to use it more? Let's build this like sandbox environment where people basically can create their own ways of generating battles. And then they ended up, because they already had the ship properties, they ended up allowing people to design ships too. Now, I think that the funny thing is that this game to me is like 100 times more successful on the strategic layer than it is on the tactical layer. But the developers and the game designers have always been focused on the tactical level. And I feel like it's almost like begrudgingly that they move more attention and more resources into the strategic layer. And to me, that speaks to why the strategic layer is just a clusterfuck of a UI. It's terrible. You could probably have this up at work and your boss would think you're doing work. That's how bad it is. It does not look like any game.
I legitimately have spreadsheets that look better than the strategic layer.
Yeah. So I don't know. I feel like if they could read the temperature in the room and understand that people like Rule the Waves because of the strategic side. And that's why something like an auto-resolve, in my opinion, is necessary. Because there's times when I think that their view is this is an amazing way of getting people into the tactical battles. And my view is this is amazing strategic layer that allows me to, if I want, also investigate how the ships are doing at the tactical layer. But that's like secondary.
When I get frustrated and put the game down, it's because I'm 27 months into a war and I just wanted to get a run of battleships finished. But instead I have to take a 2.5 hour break and fight a tactical battle for the 14th time.
Well, and the fact that there isn't a true auto resolve as well, like this is a long game.
Well, it's coming soon. I'll make a new one.
Well, but like the original game was 20 years and that was a pretty good, like it didn't feel like it was super long, but it didn't feel short. Then the second game was basically 50 years. Now the third game in the series is 80 years nominally of tech development, like 1890 to 1970. That's a long game.
Yes.
To be doing this and without an auto resolve, with many wars that you're going to fight over 80 years, I worry, I haven't gotten end to end on it yet, but I worry that's going to you're going to lose half the players by the time you hit 1940, let alone like who's going to stick around to 1970 in a campaign. They do have multiple start dates, but it's still kind of weird to me that the last start date is 1935. Like you'd think you'd want a post World War II tech one. You know, if you start in 1950, you still have the original length of the original game, pretty much.
Yeah, so the way I tend to play the game is super large fleet, so I can have more battleships because that's fun. Earliest start date, and then I set the tech speed to 40%, and I slow aircraft development. That way I get a really long dreadnought era to play with.
Yeah, you also, don't you play like the Long War mod or something like that too?
No. I've made my own custom mods before. Like, I made a mod to give more gun variation, change gun stats, because there are guns that are just arguably way better than others, so I kind of even them out. I made mods where I just removed all bombers from the game. Like, carriers were basically just there to scout.
That's awesome.
There's only planes and the 50-kilogram bombs only fighters and the 50-kilogram bombs that they could carry and stuff like that. Just to basically like postpone the carrier era where I can't have battleships anymore because I need to have 4,000 land-based bombers.
I mean, that kind of goes back to the fact that like what you're just reiterating, the core of the game is the ships with big guns shoot at ships with big guns. Like that's
the best part.
That's the best part.
That's the absolute best part of the game, and that's the part of the game I focus on, because usually when I stream it, I see about a 40% decline in audience when the carriers show up.
That's so funny.
100% increase in my frustration rate.
Oh, yeah. I think that mirrors my experience, too. I mean, I don't know about... what's funny is I started an 1890s start, and that's a series which is going up on YouTube. And I'm only in like 1893 or something like that. And I get a question in the comments. How many more episodes do you think until missiles? Like, good Lord, like 100. Exactly. Like, there's probably no way the series is going to make it that far, because I'll probably be dead. But
I really hope they add a 1950s start, though, because like you got to slog away through like the whole carrier era, which I'm not super interested in, for 20 years before missiles show up in the latest start. I guess you could speed the tech development up, but like that has other implications to the game's experience. So I don't know. They need a later start date. 1935 is too early for the last date.
One of the things that always frustrated me about the carriers is it doesn't have to be frustrating. It's mostly frustrating because of a couple mechanical things and the god-awful UI. Like the fact that you can't even copy and paste en masse for like air bases and carriers. You have to just right-click copy, right-click paste, right-click paste, right-click paste.
Oh my God, you don't remind me. Oh my God.
You could select 50 air bases at once, but you cannot paste information to 50 at once. You have to do them all individually. It was like, that was standard UI 30 years ago.
Well, you'd think they do have a publisher now. They are with Slytherin and Matrix. In the past, they were just sort of a fly-by-night, naval warfare simulation thing. So, like, you'd think they have some more resources to help with some of maybe the busy work of doing a UI UX. I don't know. Maybe that's...
Yeah, it's all exact. It's all copy and pasted from the second one, probably painfully over the course of hours from Rule of Waves 2. It's all exactly the same. Oh, but okay. So people think I'm crazy about this as a complaint of the game. I want to know what you guys think about me, because so many people who played this game told me it only affects me and nobody else. They don't know what the hell I'm talking about. So in Rule of Waves 2, and even it's worse in Rule of Waves 3, there's the dreaded close combat wiggle waggle that I get in ships. Do you guys see that?
Oh my gosh. I haven't seen it in Rule of Waves 3, but definitely in Rule of Waves 2. In fact, I was recording when one of my ships had the wiggle waggle, the enemy ship, I should say, had the wiggle waggle, and then teleported as my torpedo was about to hit it. And I took a video over to the forum and asked him what was going on with this, because it looked like the ship got out of the water and moved on the other side of my torpedo just to avoid it.
You're just in a tech void. They just beat you on some, they got a chronosphere or whatever that thing was called. That's all.
Yeah, I have it. Or do you experience like is it a big problem for you? Because I see it, but
extremely big problem for me, and it happens reliably every single tactical battle. For those of you who don't know what I'm talking about, it's a situation where, say, there's an enemy battleship going 20 knots, and you have a destroyer that has a buttload of torpedoes, is in a good position, and has a 15 knot advantage on them, but it just needs to get into a firing position to be able to launch them. You have a 15 knot advantage on them. You should be able to catch up to them easily, surpass them, and get into a good firing position. But what happens is whenever you get within a radius of an enemy ship, it looks like the captain just starts healing the wheel 30 degrees to the left and 30 degrees to the right, and the ship just wiggle waggles back and forth. And because A, you're turning a lot, you're losing speed, and B, you're increasing your linear distance traveled because you're going off to the side and then off to the other side, you're losing a ton of speed, and then you're incapable, even though you have a huge speed advantage, of overtaking an enemy ship because of the wiggle waggle. And it happens all the fucking time. And before, it used to only happen with destroyers, and now I'm seeing it happen with ships up to heavy cruisers, just wiggle waggling all over the place when I'm trying to get them into a good position. And it's so incredibly frustrating.
Yeah, the way it appears to happen to me is that it's like ships seem to exert some kind of like repulsion zone where they don't want any other ships within this small radius. And this happens a lot in night battles and short range, like you were saying, and especially even if you're not just chasing after somebody, but as two ships like cross each other's T's or whatever, like there's this, that's actually how the torpedo teleport maneuver happened, was that it looked like it was going to go left around my ship, but then it teleported to be on the right side of my ship. Anyway, I mean, that it looks like a mechanic which is trying to keep ships from traveling right on top of each other. They can collide too. I mean, you can actually have ships which do just collide in.
Oh, I do that all the time on purpose.
It's funny. Now I'm trying to think, how does that even work? Because they have this wiggle waggle, which is like being repulsed from each other, but yet you can still get collisions.
The other thing that's always annoyed the shit out of me in tactical battles is that the enemy ships always know the second a torpedo is in the water.
The developer has commented to me directly that he said that it's not true. And yet it still happened. It happened just the other day in Rule of Waves 3, where the enemy was closing. They were very, very close. And I launched a torpedo, and suddenly the very next turn, the very next minute, they turned away. Maybe it's coincidence.
I don't believe that for a hot second, because it doesn't matter if you're at 200 yards or 20,000 yards. The second the torpedo hits the water, the enemy ships turn away from it.
Yeah, they evade.
Which is why it's almost impossible to land like purposeful torpedo hits until you've got like massive spreads of 16 torpedoes in the water.
You know what this game needs? Tactical nukes.
I feel like this game is so good, and the reason why I'm so passionate about the little things it doesn't do well is because this is like one of my favorite games. But man, if they, every now and then you think about games that should be remade. This game, although it's modern, made in modern times at least, it's not modern. It's a game that, despite Rule of Waves 3 not even being released yet, I'm already ready for somebody to remake Rule of the Waves. To do it in a better graphics engine. I don't know. The concept is just perfect. It's something that's so enjoyable.
It's called Ultimate Admiral Dreadnoughts, Tortuga.
Oh.
That's why we thought that would be good. But then, turns out it's not.
I have thoughts about that game too.
Yeah, I think a lot of people have thoughts about that game.
They just announced another major patch. I didn't really see anything interesting in it, but Yeah,
they'll probably do a 180-degree change on some mechanic that was a previous 180-degree change on another mechanic.
Well, with that being said, is there anything we haven't talked about? Is there anything you wanted to mention, Ben, or Tortuga, or Eric?
So why don't we talk about some good things?
I mean, I try like the 1890s to 1920. The game is a chef's kiss. Like one of the things I love about the game is the way the ship designer works. I'm like a really weird nerd where like when I used to play some form-based RPGs where you'd sort of role play as different countries and whatnot. And one of them used a program called Spring Sharp to design your ships, which is basically it's a free, might even still be out there. It was a free download where you could design sort of ships, and it would give you sort of information about that ship, and then you could compare designs. You couldn't fight. It was literally just like the ship designer in this game. And I think that was really, that's one of the reasons this game really lured me in. And I'm like, oh my God, it's this program, but now you can do something with the ships. So like the ability to design the ships, the ability to sort of chart your nation's navy and sort of build the fleet that you want to build, unless your prime minister's a jerk and tells you they want you to build a certain number of cruisers. All of that stuff is really well done and is a lot of fun. I like the flavor of the different events that pop up. I mean, we've done, like, the three of us, we did like a role-playing series for one of the previous versions of Rule the Waves.
My heavy cruisers were still the best design ships.
Where each of us would play for a certain number of years and then hand the save off to the next person and they'd take over. Like, I think this is a really great game for building stories too. I think there's a lot here that is really good. I think a lot of our negativity is there feels like there's a lot of bolting on of mechanics without solving some of the complaints you have with other mechanics, right? Like, I need more control over which ships and why things get put into a battle in the previous games. Is, you know, like, it's just like random ships are getting pulled into battles, and like, why do I have 16 battleships in this area and one battleship is going to go off and fight on its own against 5 enemies? Like, I would probably deploy that in a squadron, or in this now in 3 in a division. Like, why would it, you know, why is the battle generator working the way it did? And like that in Rule the Waves 1 and 2 didn't get addressed. But in Rule the Waves 2, now they're like, well, we're not going to address that. We're not going to give you more fidelity over the strategic side of the game, which is where, as Tortuga said, I think is the best part of the game. But we're going to give you like air combat, which I don't know that anyone is really asking for that. So like, I feel like the complaints I mainly have is it feels like they're focusing on the wrong areas in some cases. But what is there, I think, is tremendous, especially the early game.
Yes, that's the early game is the best part. I would kill for some spit and polish.
Yeah, I think this game is any kind of naval grognard is their wet dream. I mean, this game has all the little knobs that you'd want with anything related to naval combat, and that includes now, if you really are interested in doing the whole carrier thing, you can do it. I mean, I think that there might be other games that do the carrier cat and mouse better. Maybe like Carrier Warfare 4 Guadalcanal comes to mind. I think that one does.
War in the Pacific.
Yeah, War in the Pacific does it as well. That's if you can get into that game, I mean, that's probably like the archetype for how to do naval combat stuff well. Slightly different. I mean, the one thing that's missing in this game, okay, after talking about other things, but there is a little bit of a disconnect between when you're wearing your Secretary of the Navy hat and then you go into the tactical battles and you're wearing your Admiral hat. There's a bit of a disconnect at the operational level. The battle generator, I call it like the whipping boy of the game, because everyone kind of complains about getting weird battles. And I think they've done a good job in Rule the Waves 3. I haven't seen any utterly bizarre battles generated, although that may just be a matter of playing more and maybe it's out there. But I think that there's a disconnect for me. Like, I'm being blockaded as Germany right now. And a blockade is really kind of an operational action. There's also things you can do to try to break a blockade. You can, sally out and raid and all this stuff. But the thing is, none of those things will matter. The operational point is not really addressed. And to me, it's frustrating, because if I'm the Secretary of the Navy and then I'm also the Admiral controlling the fleet, I would just expect it to be also include the middle ground between those two, which is the person who's like the Nimitz, the Halsey, who's like controlling things going on in the whole theater.
Yeah, the randomness of what happens is strange. You've got the strategic level and you've got the tactical level, and then there's just a big void of like what you, as you said, on the operational level. Why are we turning this Ben's request of positivity back over to negativity?
I do have to interrupt though. Because I gotta get going to work pretty soon. So I just want to say that I do fucking love the game. I play it a lot. I've been playing it a lot for years and years and years since Rule the Waves 1 now. There's one anecdote I want to end on, though, was that in my Austria-Hungary game, some bastard United Nations bastards decided they were going to do a naval treaty, and I said no, because I was building my first run of proper battleships. Big gun battleships, 10 14-inch guns, best in the world. It's going to be awesome. They were like 11 months away from completion, so they're 2/3 done. And they go, okay. How about a slightly less restrictive treaty? I said, no. Third time, slightly less restrictive treaty. If you say no this time, it'll raise world tension, might start a war with Italy. No, I'm ready to fight a war. And then the next turn they go, oh, the Kaiser signed the treaty anyway. We're scrapping your entire fucking fleet.
Oh, wow.
I love that, though. I love the naval treaties. I know we didn't really touch on them, but like the ability for the politicians to say, screw you, we're interested in peace. We're going to sign this treaty. And you're the admiral who's probably just fuming that all this work you put in is now being thrown away.
Yep, that's when I discovered the problem with refitting ships, because when they scrapped all my battleships, I went to refit all my other ones. They're like, no, you can't do that either. So I went to build some nice heavy cruisers, and they went, oh, those guns are too big. You can't do that. So I went to build some light cruisers, and they're like, nah, you don't have the technology to put that kind of gun on that kind of ship. I was like, oh my God, I'm going to strangle you all. Just let me build a ship.
Well, on that note, I think we'll probably wrap the episode up here. Before we let you go, though, Ben, anything you want to plug? Where can folks find you?
Oh, I make it easy. Benjamin Magnus everywhere. YouTube, Twitch, Twitter, all those places. As we stated in the beginning, I work for Paradox, so I host their streams every Wednesday. So if you say hi to me there, too.
What time is that stream at?
2 p.m. Central European summertime every Wednesday.
But it's on the VODs too, right? I mean, they post that?
Yeah, all the VODs are up.
Well, thanks for coming on, Ben. It was a lot of fun to talk with you.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It was fun.
We'll have to do this again sometime, but that's going to do it for today's episode. So until next time, this is Matt. You can call me the Historical Gamer. For Eric and Ben, thanks for tuning in. Until next time, we're out.